May all beings be happy. May all beings be healthy. May all beings be free from harm. May all beings love life. May all beings awaken. Welcome to another Cuke Audio podcast. I'm DC Puba of Cuke Audio and Cuke Archives, preserving the legacy of Shunryu Suzuki and those whose paths cross his and anything else that comes to mind. I pray that you and yours are safe and comfortable, free from economic hardship, and able to get out and do whatever it is you want within the limitations of the universal precept of do as little harm as possible. So today we have a guest, Lee Klinger Lesser. Lee was a long-time student of and assistant of Charlotte Selver, who, along with her husband, Charles Brooks, taught sensory awareness. Charlotte is one of the people, she's like one of the founders of the human potential movement and that sensory awareness movement. So Lee will have plenty to say about that. She's also a co-founder, along with Chris Fortin, of Veterans Path, and you can check it out on veteranspath.org. And they were involved with something to do with firefighters at Tassajara, too. I can't remember exactly what. Anyway, look, we're going to learn about that. Lee's experience at Zen Center. But also it was really neat to hear what she had to say about her time with Harry Roberts, the Yurok shaman, who was so close to us. Okay, so look, we'll get right into that after we've had our pause to meditate. So, if you're of such a mind, hit pause when you hear the bell and meditate or whatever for as long as you wish. And when you're ready to come back and join us, hit unpause. And we'll be here to hit the bell to end the meditation, and we'll give Lee Klinger Lesser a call.
Hello.
Hello there. How you doing?
Hi, David.
Hi. You're in Missoula.
I am.
What are you doing there?
My daughter and two grandsons live here. And so Mark and I actually bought a house here so we live just down the street from them.
Oh.
And
wow.
Yeah, we still have our home in California, but our second grandson is just 5 weeks old. And I feel great being here. I don't really want to go anywhere else right now.
Huh. That's really interesting. Yeah, nice place, nice country. I've had a lot of friends from there. Yeah.
Yeah, my daughter and her husband have lived here for a few years now. They really like it.
Yeah. Yeah, it was sort of the hip capital of that part of the country back in the 60s.
It kind of still is.
Yeah, I would imagine. Yeah, and beautiful too. Yeah. So, other than that, what are you up to?
Well, I'm still leading sensory awareness workshops. And as Chris probably told you, that we led a retreat for wildland firefighters at Tassajara.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
And I'm also working on a book. I'm really trying to find a way to help people turn towards working to address the climate crisis, and looking to see how I can link sensory awareness practice to waking up to what's so hard to face, and look at the continuum of how we work with our own bodies and how we work with what's happening to the earth. So I'm working on writing that book.
Oh, well, hurry up and get it out. Yeah. So, what do you think about the climate crisis?
I think I think we're in really bad shape. I think we've done so much harm, and we're passing tipping points that aren't going to be, returnable. And we still can make it reverse, and stop the harm we're doing. To some extent, the species that have been lost aren't going to come back, and the rising tides and the glaciers that are melting are not going to return. But we can certainly mitigate the harm that we're doing.
Yeah.
But I think I'm just so struck by how much denial there still is. And, it's interesting, that the combination of denial and then doom and gloom. So it's like either people are paralyzed because they don't want to see it, or because it's hopeless and so it's not worth doing anything. And that kind of all maintains the status quo.
Huh. I've always felt like it doesn't matter how hopeless things are, that it's just good practice to do what you can.
Exactly. I agree.
Yeah.
What's happening in Indonesia in terms of people's consciousness and what people are doing?
Oh, well, there are, of course, people trying to increase awareness of climate change, but it's really not. People don't think about stuff like that here that I know. But it's pardon. It's a big country. I would say it would be pretty difficult to get people, a significant number of people here to be aware of it. That the hope would be the students, and there are students who care, but they feel like whatever Indonesia does, and it won't matter anyway. And I don't know. I've tried to get, gone to poetry slams and tried to get the people at them aware of the climate crisis, and it just is not on their minds. They're thinking about their sexual lives and their parents. It's mainly pretty young people. And, becoming a person and stuff like that. It's just, but, there are people who have young people working with them on climate initiatives. I think, artists and musicians, are a little more, in tune than the poets I've seen, but I don't know. I have I just have my little tiny viewpoint. Yeah, so, in the past, when there were big changes here, it was, led by students. So, we'll see. All they could do is try to be a good example, because, what really matters is the changes on a very large scale done by the United States and China and India and Russia. So I don't know. It's Yeah, we'll see what happens in the future. There might be some turning point. You know?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Well, anyway, thanks for working on that and doing your bit. So you. I wanted to hear from you about several things. One is your work with veterans, and the other is your work with Charlotte, and the other is your spiritual path, So maybe why don't you tell me where you were born, and let's start there.
I was born in Manhattan, New York City.
Ah, so was Katrinka, my wife. Huh. Yeah. And when was that?
1951.
And so, what's your, what were the significant things that happened to you to make you, when did you start questioning or wondering what's happening or, questioning the reality that you were being taught or whatever?
Well, it's an interesting question because this isn't exactly when I started This isn't when I started questioning, but it's something that's always struck me. Is I was born 6 years after World War II,
right?
And I'm Jewish. My family's Jewish. I know that I lost relatives in the Holocaust. My my father was in the army, but he wasn't deployed. But one uncle was in the Marines and was in Iwo Jima. The other uncle helped to liberate a concentration camp. And all my life, nobody in my family talked about the Holocaust. And I grew up in a predominantly Jewish community where obviously the adults settled together and gathered together to create a safe community for their families. And I grew up thinking that the majority of people in the world were Jewish. The public schools were closed.
That's great.
I did. But what's interesting is that created a kind of safety for me and a confidence because I didn't know I was a minority. The public schools in my town were closed on Jewish holidays because nobody would be there. The minority were Christians, and so it gave me a really different perspective of the world as I was growing up. And it wasn't until I was recently even thinking about how could it be that my family never talked about the Holocaust, and they didn't.
Yeah.
But it was when I was at college and didn't really know what I was doing there. I had always been taught, get good grades so you can get into a good college. And so all through high school, I was getting good grades. Then I got to college and they said, you got to get good grades in order to get into graduate school. And I didn't know, it's like I wasn't there. I had no passion for studying. It was just kind of, that's what was on the conveyor belt. You went from high school to college and did this. And my sister was a kind of, she was the kind of the dark sheep in the family and the rebel in the family and kind of held that space. And when she was 16, she took off and stowed away on a ship to Europe. And they found her and brought her back. And then a few weeks later, she took off and went hitchhiking across the country. And she was actually picked up right outside of New York City by a man who was a survivor of concentration camps.
Wow.
And he picked her up and took her to his home in Ohio and called my parents and said, your daughter's safe. And my parents' solution was to send me to go hitchhike with her.
That's a good solution.
You think so? I think it's a crazy solution.
It is. It's great, though.
Anyway, it changed because I was 18, and so my sister and I, and it's interesting. It was this man and his two brothers all survived concentration camps. And he was incredibly gracious with us. And he had a business where he had truck drivers, and he put us into one of these big, huge trucks and said, you pass them on to another truck driver at each, truck stop. And that worked until we got to New Mexico. And there we had to find a different ride. And we eventually got into a truck, and he dropped us off in Delano, California, when Cesar Chavez and Dolores Huerta, the United Farm Workers, were signing their very first contracts with the multimillionaire grape growers.
Yeah.
And so I stayed there. My sister kept on hitchhiking, and she went up to Oregon, but I stayed and volunteered with the farm workers, United Farm Workers.
Wow.
And it was amazing. Yeah, it was amazing, David. It was so moving to me to see this group of people coming together and having such a impact by, and they've been doing this work for such a long time. And I happened to be there just when they had signed their first contract. And so I worked in the Union Hall, and at Friday nights, Cesar Chavez and Dolores Huerta and other people would talk in the public square, and people would gather and sing songs and eat tamales. And the farm workers that I met also were incredibly inspiring to me. And at that time, I didn't speak Spanish. And they were all saying, you need to go to Mexico. You need to learn to speak Spanish. But just seeing the power of what they were doing together was really profound for me. And also, when I left, go back to college, we got $5 a week as we slept in the Union Hall, and they had some communal meals, and we got $5 a week spending money.
Hey, what year was that? How old were you?
I was 18.
Wow.
No, I was 19.
Wow.
Yeah, I was 19. So I guess I was 19 when I hitchhiked with my sister. And
was she older?
No, she was younger. So let me say.
Oh, right. You said she was 16 when she stowed away.
Yeah, she was 16. Yeah, so I must have been, yes, I was 19.
Wow.
And when I was leaving, so there was one woman, I'll never forget her, Linda Lizarraga. She was a big woman, single mom of 5 kids. They'd housed her in a railroad car. And she and this Filipino man, had been 2 of my friends, and they gathered together. They raised $5 to send me off on the bus with $5 that everybody chipped in to give me.
Oh.
And isn't that something?
Yeah.
I mean, it still makes me cry. It's like, and the kind of the most valuable $5, and so then I went back to college, but I didn't know what the heck I was doing there. And I remember I had a philosophy class, and I did the research on some paper, and then I went to the philosophy teacher and I said, I've done the research. I've learned all I need to learn. I don't really want to write the paper. And I've been a college instructor, and I can't imagine how I would have responded if somebody came to me and said that. But he was great. He said, "Well, what are you doing here at college?" And I said, "Well, I like tutoring people in the nearby neighbor town, and I like riding bicycles and whatever." And he said, "Well, why are your parents paying $3,000 a year for you to tutor kids in the nearby town?" So that question was a great question for me. And then I went home for Thanksgiving break, and my mother, I was really trying to kind of disentangle and separate myself from my family and family dynamics and patterns and figure out who I was. And my mom came into my room and she handed me a brochure, and she said, "You should meet this woman. She can change your life." And then my mother turned and walked out the door. And the brochure was to take a workshop with this woman called Charlotte Selver in Mexico.
No kidding.
In Mexico during the month when I had to do a 1 month project off campus from college.
Huh.
So it was kind of kismet that, I mean, I had no idea what the workshop was, but my mother had never spoken to me like that before, and she never did afterwards. And so I signed up for those 2 workshops, and I called up Charlotte to ask her if she knew of a family in Mexico that I could live with, because I thought if I went there, I'd much rather get to know the people and stay in a hotel.
Yeah.
And Charlotte thought that I was very, what was the word she used? I don't remember. There's some word, presumptuous or something. And I thought she was exceedingly unhelpful. But anyway, she gave me the name of the hotel, and I wrote to them in a very broken Spanish because I didn't speak Spanish. And these 2 women said I could stay at their home. And so I did. And that's where I took my first workshops in sensory awareness. And I also felt so at home in Mexico that I dropped out of college and stayed there for 6 months.
Where in Mexico?
It was a town called Cihuatlán, Jalisco. It's on the west coast, near Manzanillo, kind of a few hours south of Puerto Vallarta.
Mm-hmm.
And so that was kind of, all of this was a kind of wake up for me, that being exposed to the United Farm Workers Union, and being in Mexico and such a different culture, and having the workshop where I felt I had 3. I mean, I don't know how much detail you want me to give you. I mean,
yeah, as much as you want.
Well, I had 3 profound experiences in my first sensory awareness workshop, and that was it. I was hooked. The first one was, I was disconnected from my own body. I was so uncomfortable. I was 19 years old. I didn't feel comfortable in my body. I wasn't aware of any kind of experiences. I wasn't paying any attention to my sensory experience. And but so being in Mexico, I felt at home and actually felt connected to my body in a way I hadn't before. But in the workshop, which I had no idea really what I was doing there and what was happening. But, little by little, Charlotte was offering these experiences and guiding us to pay attention. And I remember sitting on a fence looking out at the ocean and just sitting there watching the waves. And all of a sudden, I actually experienced the movement of breath in my armpits. And it was the first time I had any conscious experience of breath. And as I sat there, I just felt like breathing breathed me. I wasn't doing it. And I'm seeing the ocean. And I just had such a clear feeling that I was as natural as the ocean, that I was natural. Breath breathed me. And that was the first time I ever experienced anything like that.
Well, please, details. If that's an example of you don't know how many details I want you to get into, just do the details. That's good.
Well, so
more details.
That was one. And then the second one was, we just, these classes, it was like several hours in the morning and several hours in the afternoon. And you never knew what was going to happen. And she would guide us in having some kind of exploration. And then there would be a time of sharing. And one day, I don't even remember what the exploration was, but a woman shared. She said she felt like she was choked up in her throat, like she just felt all congested in her throat. And she said it with a lot of intensity and feeling. And Charlotte asked somebody to go and get a pitcher of water and a glass. And then she gave that to the woman, and she told the woman to start pouring the water into the glass. And as the woman was pouring, as she got to the top, she started to stop. And Charlotte said, "Keep pouring." So she kept pouring, and the water spilled all over the floor, and she started weeping and weeping and weeping. And like really strongly. And then Charlotte looked at her and said, "Can you bow to it?" And she said, "You know, if this wasn't here, you wouldn't have to feel it. Now that you're feeling it, now something new can start." And that was also incredibly life-changing for me, because the way I grew up, just like nobody talked about the Holocaust, my family, nobody talked about pain. If something was difficult or painful, it was like, stuff it, don't say anything, keep it on, just push it down. And here's Charlotte saying, bow to pain. And that was life-changing for me. It was, it was just such a different paradigm. And the third experience, so all three of these experiences have been kind of like core that for the last, 53 years, I've been working with the same things. And the other one was, one day Charlotte had us work with a partner, and she told everybody to find a person, and she wanted us to hold the person's foot. Well, that seemed like the most bizarre thing in the world to me. Like, why in the world would I want to go hold some stranger's foot? It just, I wasn't drawn to it at all. But I looked around and everybody was finding a partner. And so I found a partner, and I'm sitting by this partner's foot. And I thought, well, if I'm going to do this, I'm not just going to do it. I'm going to make sure I do a really good job. So I have this story started going in my head. So I'm holding this person's foot, and it's like, don't worry, I'm here. I've got your foot. I'm going to be really super duper foot holder. I've got you. And the story is just spinning in my head. And Charlotte said, "Are you doing anything extra?" And when she said that, I noticed that my shoulder was just about touching my ear. Like I was so busy doing a good job that my shoulder was just high up and tight. And when I felt that, my shoulder came down by itself. And as my shoulder came down by itself, I realized that my arm was really tense and tight, just doing all this extra effort to do a good job. And as I gave up the holding in my shoulder and in my arm, I came down to my hand on this person's foot, and I realized I was squeezing this poor person's foot, and I didn't feel them at all. And when I gave up the squeezing, all of a sudden, I was actually really in contact with this other person, and I was present, and I felt the temperature of their foot. I felt the pulsing in their foot. I actually was feeling this other person. And all that time before, I was so busy with, I'm going to do a good job, and I'm super duper foot holder and all this. Well, that was also just life-changing for me. I realized how much of my life I was using extra effort. And in little ways, all in little ways and big ways. So those were three huge wake-up calls for me and invitations for me that have stayed with me. And, that's what hooked me. It was also because this wasn't philosophy, and it wasn't theory, and it was just completely accessible in the moment, the experiences. And it was my own experience that was guiding and teaching me. So that led me to continue studying with Charlotte. And also we hit it off with each other. Like we were really close and connected. And part of that also was that I didn't need her to be perfect. And I actually could see her imperfections. At first they really pissed me off. I thought, how could you teach this wonderful, such deep presence and such awareness, which was opening and expanding me. And then the more I got to know her and the more I spent time with her and with Charles, I would see them have these ridiculous, I would see them have these petty or intense arguments and like, or she wasn't being aware and she wasn't living this awareness. And I got really angry at her. And And I wrote her this really angry letter saying, how can you teach these things and then act this way? And I don't remember how she responded to me. But what eventually I realized that what she was teaching was completely authentic. It was something she understood and believed in and committed her life to. And she was she was a human being with the areas that she hadn't strengthened or developed.
Yeah.
And that what it gave me was realizing, oh, she's not perfect, which means I'm never going to be perfect, which means I can stop trying to be perfect. I can give that up as a goal. And then that gave me so much more freedom to be with Charlotte and for us to just love each other and be allies. And I didn't need her to be perfect, which, of course she wasn't and would never be. But that was really helpful for me to see that.
Mm. Yeah, I appreciate it. I like it. Yeah, that's helpful to me.
Yeah, so, I got to study with Charlotte for 33 years. And she's with me all the time. She died in 2003, but these teachings and her presence and her confidence in me too, they just stay with me and help to continue teaching me.
Well, so you were there 6 months at that time in Mexico.
In Mexico, I was there for 6 months. The workshops with Charlotte there were 2 14-day workshops.
Yeah.
And then I dropped out of college. And then the other part of what woke me up also was I came back. I came back from, it's interesting, I came back from Mexico and I didn't know what I was going to do. And I thought that I wanted to have more life experience. But somebody suggested that I go back to Oberlin College, which is where I was in school, and see if they would give me credit or let me take a year I wanted to study psychology and theater. And I went and met with the dean, and for some reason, which I don't know, I think somehow I coincided with the vision he had for students, because I met with him and told him what I wanted to do, and he said, okay, go do it. We'll give you a year's credit. And I didn't have to check in with them. I didn't have to meet their requirements. I mean, I had an amazing year. I volunteered in a women's prison. I volunteered in a psychiatric hospital. I volunteered at a runaway home for teenagers. And I participated in a Gestalt group and took theater games and acting. And so I had an incredible year. And then I wrote like a 36-page paper and got recommendation letters from all the people I worked with. And they gave me a year's credit at college.
Wow. And where is Oberlin?
Ohio.
Right. And where did you do these things that you got the credit for?
New York.
Uh-huh.
New York. I did that mostly in Manhattan.
Uh-huh. So what year is that now?
Well, that would have been 1972.
Oh, goodness.
71 to 72.
Yeah. And you were in Oberlin to begin with and didn't know why you were there, right?
Exactly.
Yeah, but then you sort of figured out how to make it work.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But I had I graduated in 1973, so the regular time I would have graduated, but I was only on campus for 2 years out of the 4. Because I dropped out and spent 6 months in Mexico. And then I did this year-long program that I developed myself. And then Charlotte was going to lead a 9-month study group starting in January of my senior year of college. And I realized I wanted to take that 9-month study group, which meant I wouldn't be there for my last semester of my senior year. So I took like 19 units of summer school classes, and then I took as many classes as I could in the fall. And they let me do a six units worth of private reading to complete my degree, so I could leave and go do the study group with Charlotte. And I did. And then I thought I was going to go to graduate school for social work, but I decided I wanted to work first. In the year that I was doing my program at home in New York, I was diagnosed with thyroid cancer.
Oh, goodness.
When I was 21, I was diagnosed with thyroid cancer.
Oh, gosh.
Or 20 or 21. And, which was terrifying. And I had surgery. I had my thyroid gland removed. But then they didn't do radiation or chemotherapy. But I've been taking, synthetic hormone ever since. But that was a huge wake-up call. And that was part of my year at home, doing all the volunteer work and everything I did. So that was also something that just really made me wonder what was, I realized that I was going to die, and what was I doing here on this earth? And that was significant in me going to Zen Center. But I also went to Zen Center to study with Charlotte. That's why I went originally to Green Gulch.
Oh,
because Charlotte was.
In what year?
College,
in what year?
1978.
78. Wow, that's skipping ahead quite a bit.
Well, so I graduated from college, and I thought that I was going to go to graduate school in social work. But I decided that I wanted to work first. And also, when I had been in Mexico doing this 9-month study group with Charlotte, which was through the spring and fall of 1973, I met a Mexican man who had been a former bullfighter, and we became lovers. And when I finished the study group, we met in Houston, Texas. He came up from Mexico, and we lived together in Houston for a while. And in Houston, I started working. I started working in a halfway house for teenagers. And first I worked teaching English to Spanish-speaking adults. But then I was working in a halfway house for teenagers. And after, so that would have been from 73. Oh no, I started working at the halfway house 74, something like that. Probably 1974. And then I was trying to figure out, did I want to get a degree in social work? Did I want to be an obstetrician? Did I want to be a teacher? And after I'd been working with the teenagers for about 3.5 years, I think I was feeling like it was time for me to do something and feel what was going to be the career for my life. And I couldn't figure it out. Nothing was clear to me. So after trying for a year, I started visiting people important to me. And I went to visit Charlotte, and she was in Mill Valley. She had gallbladder surgery. So she was recovering from gallbladder surgery. And she and Charles were talking about this 16-week class that they were going to give at some place called Green Gulch Farm. And I heard them saying it, but it had nothing to do with me because I lived in Houston, Texas. So I was just hearing them. And for a year, I'd been trying to decide and figure out what was next in my life. And Charles drove me to the airport. I was taking a red-eye flight back to Houston. And the moment I got on the plane, I sat down, and it became utterly clear to me I was going to take that 16-week workshop in this place called Green Gulch Farm. And if I did that, I was going to have to quit my job because they wouldn't give me a 4-month leave of absence. And if I quit my job, I might as well leave Houston, Texas, because there was nothing keeping me there anymore. And I drove to work and gave a month's notice. And Charlotte arranged for me to live at Green Gulch and be a Zen student, even though I had never heard of Zen. And I knew nothing about meditation. And that's how I got to Green Gulch.
That's great. Boy, you sure couldn't do that now. That's terrific.
Well, she had her pull there, and the workshop she was doing was only a weekend, and then 2 nights a week for 4 months, and it closed for the weekend. So it was really meant for people who lived in the area. But I lived there, and then one of my first jobs was to go help take care of Harry Roberts as he was recovering from his broken back.
At Yvonne's home?
At Yvonne's home, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so Harry became an important teacher for me. And I stayed at Zen Center for the next 6.5 years.
And 2 things I'd like you to clarify here you mentioned a person named Charles once. Could you tell us who Charles is?
Yeah, Charles Brooks was Charlotte's third husband. And no, Charles was her second husband.
Right.
Yeah, Charles was her second husband, and they taught together. They taught a lot of workshops together. Charles had met Charlotte in New York and studied with her, and then they taught together.
And what was the age difference there?
Ooh, Charlotte was older than Charles.
A lot older than Charles.
Right. I think, I don't know, David. I don't know if it was 14 years or more than that. I don't remember. I think maybe 14 years. I think something like that.
And they were married, right?
Oh, yeah.
Oh, you already said that. Yeah, because I always thought of it as Charlotte and Charles until he died.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. And what was the other thing I was going to ask you? Oh, Harry. Tell us about Harry. For one thing, how'd he break his back? But the other thing, just tell who Harry was.
I don't know how Harry broke his back, because when I met him, his back was already broken. Do you know how he broke his back?
No, I don't. But who would know is Eric Larson, and I'm going to talk to him soon.
Yeah, I'm sure Eric would. Yeah. I mean, Harry. So again, I was a completely new Zen student. I was there to study with Charlotte. That's why I went to Zen Center. And I really didn't know anything about Zen. I didn't go there for Zen. I thought it was fine with me to do whatever the Zen stuff was, because I wanted to study with Charlotte. And I knew that I had to figure out what was next for me in my life. And I was tired of trying to figure it out and wait. And so she said, live here and be a Zen student. That was fine. But, so I'd be going into the Zendo, the meditation hall, and there'd be all these bizarre rituals and incense and bowing. And
yeah.
It had no meaning to me. I had no understanding of it. And so I did it. And one of my jobs was to go down and take care of Harry. And Harry was very crusty guy, very down to earth, very direct, kind of cantankerous. And it's funny, my father would read the Wind Bell, and none of it made sense to him. And then he saw this article that Harry had written, and he wanted to meet Harry, which was really pretty amazing. Which I did arrange a meeting for them one time when my dad came out from New York. But I would go down, and Harry had this big, overnight he would pee a lot and have a big bucket of pee under his bed, and then he'd want me to drive. My first task of the day was to empty this big bucket of pee, and then sometimes drive Harry in his truck to wherever he wanted to go, or we'd go for a kind of walk in the woods. And he was using crutches, and we didn't go far. But he would always ask me, we'd pause, and he'd say, okay, what do you see? And I would describe what I saw, and then Harry would show me all the things I didn't see, and all the interconnections of things that I wasn't seeing at all, and just how much detail. And one day on one of our walks in the woods, Harry turned to me and said, so, you want to know what this meditation stuff is all about? And I said, yes, because I didn't have any clue. He said, I'll tell you. He said, I'll tell you the first thing, but it's not the most important thing, but it's the first thing. You have to stop all the busyness in your head. The second thing, you have to find your song. The third thing, you have to sing it. And that's what meditation is all about.
Oh, wow. Well, now, what was Harry's tradition? I mean, where had he studied?
Well, I mean, Harry was a wild character, and he wasn't a meditation teacher. You know, Harry was trained by his adopted uncle in the Yurok Indian tradition, and so he was trained in Yurok wisdom. And you know, people say Harry was trained as a Yurok Indian shaman, or he was trained in just how to live a good life based on Yurok Indian wisdom and practice.
Yeah,
and he was at Green Gulch as a consultant, about the taking care of the environment. He was an agronomist and a horticulturalist, and so he was recovering from his broken back at Yvonne Rand's house, but he was also guiding Green Gulch to look at the physical environment with the intention to see the impact over 500 years. So Harry was helped to plant these windbreaks. Now there's huge trees all through the fields, and just having the vision of how to take care of the land.
Yeah.
And then he mentored a lot of Zen students in many different things at Green Gulch, because he had all kinds of knowledge. And Harry also had a formula for life, which he would gruffly repeat to me over and over again. And his formula for life was, what do you want? What do you have to do to get it? Are you willing to pay the price? And those were two real core lessons that I got from Harry. Because I used to think if I could only find the right, finding the right choice meant like I didn't have to pay a price. Somehow I had that complete illusion. And somehow Harry's formula was just so simple but very clarifying and helpful.
Yeah. Wow, that's neat. And it's interesting also just to give a little window on how Green Gulch was dealing with a new student there. It sounds like you didn't have any instruction of any kind.
No, I had regular meditation instruction. So they told me, the forms and, what to focus on and how to focus on breath. But I mean, the forms and all the Japanese rituals, I didn't understand them. And it was just strange to me. And Charlotte said, go live here. So I didn't I didn't research it. I had no idea what I was coming to, or what it was all about. I was given basic meditation instruction, but it didn't have meaning for me. And it didn't, somehow Harry's definition of meditation, just recognizing, okay, you learn how to stop the busyness in your head. You learn how to come to quiet, which was very aligned with sensing. But, in order to find your song, in order to find, who are you? What's your purpose? And how do you be of service? How do you share from this place of being authentic? somehow, that connection hadn't been there for me in any way because that wasn't explained. It was just like, okay, calm your mind, focus. Here's your focus. Sit down in this posture. Focus on breath, and you can count your breath, and you can sit in this way. But the why or for what or just some living connection with it, I didn't have any understanding of that.
Yeah. Well, that's really interesting to me. Actually, I like it that, see, you go to this spiritual community, right? And people aren't pumping you full of things to believe in, right? That's really unusual.
That's true.
Yeah. It's sort of, you were like, it was up to you. That's neat. I've worried at times about too much instruction and codification of things, because there's always a tendency to do that, and also to create more ceremonies. And, that's sort of natural. But that's a very interesting picture of it, and that's in 1978, you're saying.
Yeah.
78. How long were you involved with Harry? Just that period of time?
Well, Harry died in 1981.
Yeah.
And I went down. Yeah. So I was connected to Harry until I went down to Tassajara.
Yeah.
And I went to Tassajara. Actually, I must have been a Zen Center for 5.5 years, not 6.5 years. I was at Zen Center for 5.5 years. Because I went down to Tassajara probably in the summer of 1980, and then lived at Tassajara from 80 to 83.
Yeah. When you were seeing Harry, I guess, I had a cabin at Avance, and I used to talk to Harry a lot. I fixed up, you remember that little shack in back, close to the place next door, where
Miami?
Peter and Wendy live now, and it was a tack room, I think, originally for saddles and stuff, and I turned it into a cabin, but you were gone when I was doing that.
What year was that?
Well, it was while Harry was still alive, but maybe I started it in 79 or something. But so you went to Tassajara. Now, so you're there studying with Charlotte. You're doing this Zen stuff, and you don't know what it's about, but you end up going to Tassajara, so something happened.
Well, yeah, something resonated for me, and the form was so different than sensing. I mean, it's like, but there was something very kindred, which was about waking up.
You said fencing. You said fencing.
No, sensing.
Oh, sensing. Oh, yeah, I wondered. Oh, so you're calling your work with Charlotte sensing.
Yeah, so it was, either we called it sensory awareness or we called it sensing.
Ah, yeah. Oh, okay. Go on.
So there was a whole kindred, the whole kinship. The invitation to wake up. The forms are completely different, and the structure, but the essence resonated for me. And I met my husband. I met Mark, who became my husband. I met Mark on my first day at Green Gulch.
Oh.
On top of a truckload of horse manure.
That's so romantic. Oh.
Yeah, I was thrilled. Mark had just delivered this truck to Green Gulch filled with horse manure. He had shoveled it. They'd brought it from some stables up the highway, and I had finished my job and was wandering through the fields, and he asked if I needed a job, and I said yes, and so he told me to go get a pitchfork, and I got a pitchfork and got up on this truck, and I was like, wow, I'm on a farm. There's manure. It's like, I just felt awesome.
Wow.
And then it started kind of raining, and he promptly left me there to finish unloading the truck, and he went inside to do his paperwork. But,
well, horse manure is fairly unoffensive, don't you think?
Well, it definitely has the smell of manure, but I loved it. I was outside, and I felt like, wow, this is earthy. This is connected to the earth. I was quite thrilled. But Mark and I started our kind of romantic relationship a few months after I got to Green Gulch, and we were married in 1981.
Oh.
So I think I stayed because it really spoke to me to be there, and the practice was speaking to me, and the community was speaking to me, and so there was something vital that was happening, and some kind of, I think, dropping in deeper to it's fun in a way, the roots of sensory awareness, because for me, Charlotte was always my teacher. Like, I never really had a teacher who was at Zen Center. I learned from a lot of different people, but nobody was a root teacher for me. And Charlotte was always my root teacher all through the years I was at Zen Center. And sensing was always my core practice. But it was like, so if I'm bowing to the altar, I used to love to bow at the altar to go to the baths, or bow going into the bathroom. And I mean, bowing, but it's such an embodied experience, and it's such a moment, living in the moment experience. And, Zen practice was, about being present in the moment, and whatever you're doing is being present. And so it was just all deepening for me.
So,
and at Tassajara.
Go on.
Yeah, go ahead. No, go ahead. What were you going to ask?
I'm just Tassajara, so that was Tassajara. What happened there?
Well, Tassajara has so much power. Just being there in that valley and dropping in, and in my time there, my mother became critically ill, and I left Tassajara to go accompany my mom as she died. And then I came back. I was gone for about 4 months, and then came back, and then I was pregnant at Tassajara. So the year that I was pregnant, I was grieving for my mother, and I was becoming a mother, and sitting meditation and feeling my son move in my womb for the first time when I was sitting zazen, and just sitting there and feeling like this little butterfly fluttering inside of me. And so birth and death were so connected for me, and just sitting meditation and grieving and welcoming new life and hearing the creek, and it was very, very what do I want to say? Well, it was very primal, and and I think also the thing that I most learned at Tassajara, with all the hours of meditation and just being there and not doing other things, was that there's no place to run. And I really, that became something that that I understood and that I trusted, and that was my core lesson that I took from Tassajara, actually. And my son, my first child, Jason, was born in April of 1983. He just turned 40 yesterday. And you know what?
Oh.
Today is Charlotte's birthday. Today is Charlotte's birthday, David.
Oh, is that right? Is that right?
Yeah, she was born. She was born on April 4th. But I ended up burying my mom's ashes at Tassajara. And the day before we were leaving Tassajara, we did this whole ritual up on the hillside where we buried her ashes and covered trees with her beautiful colored scarves. That she was very dramatic, and she was an actress. And so this tree at Tassajara was covered with her silk scarves, and the community helped me scan how pull the stone from the creek that I had chosen and somehow rigged it and got it up the hillside. And we were there in the year that Richard Baker left, and so there was a kind of gap in who was holding the space, who was making the rules. And I guess he had told me that it was okay to bury my mom's ashes there, and then Mel helped work it out. And but yeah, so we buried my mother's ashes at Tassajara, and then Mark and I actually walked out over the 14-mile Tassajara road with our baby in the snuggly as our goodbye to Tassajara when we left. But it was an incredible gift to have the chance to live in this place of practice, and then for me to go back over these years and bring veterans there, and also do the retreat for firefighters, and just feel the power of, people's intention to understand how we create suffering and how we meet suffering and how we can wake up and what brings joy. And in the work with veterans, one veteran said, I've never cried so much and I've never laughed so much as we would do these retreats. And so there's something really powerful about the valley and the practice. And I think for me, it's been really helpful, actually. The formality of Zen practice has helped me in the sense of, the sensory awareness is always my core practice, but there's always been this complete affinity and kinship with Zen practice. And I think, just even the Han and this kind of forms and rituals that are used to help us wake up. And the Han, different wordings, but, whatever, awake, birth and death are the, important matters, don't waste time. That's been very, very core for me. And working with people with so much trauma, in Tassajara, that's held by this kind of intention, was very profound. And my work with veterans, because Chris and I started Veterans Path, and it was, we spent kind of 12 years building the organization and cultivating ways to offer practice to veterans. And it's been some of the deepest, most meaningful, moving work I've ever done in my life.
When did that start? How did it start?
What year did we start? Well, I'll tell you how it started. In the year I can figure out. When we were about to go and bomb Iraq, the day before we were going to bomb Iraq, there were demonstrations all over the world. And I was marching in the streets of San Francisco, and my daughter was marching by my side.
I was there with my son. Yeah.
Were you?
Oh, yeah.
And so it was so reminiscent to me of the protests against the Vietnam War when I was a college student, and when I was at Oberlin, I remember going in a U-Haul truck with the back open, and a whole bunch of us students filled the truck, and we went to protest in Washington, D.C., and So here I was, now I'm walking with my daughter. And so it's not my peers going to war, but my children, because the next day when we bombed Iraq. And I was so, I was kind of distraught and troubled. And I thought, I know I'm never going to stop us from going to war. And I just felt like, what is it that I can do? And I thought about what I would want for my own kids if they were coming back from war. And also thinking about all the suffering I'd seen with Vietnam veterans for decades and decades. And just, how terribly they were treated when they came back, including, I would never spit on anybody, and I would never do something directly to someone. But in my mind and in my heart, I was vilifying them. And I remember a veteran getting on it was when I was coming back from the United Farm Workers this summer, and I was taking a bus across the country. I remember I don't even know what branch of military they were in, but a soldier came on the bus in a uniform, and probably if looks could kill, my looks would have killed this man, because I just had this such a story that I was vilifying this person, because at that time, they were also showing, all the horrendous things that happened in war, and they were showing the kids being killed and all of these terrible things that they have since not done. They haven't been so graphic, I don't think, ever since the Vietnam War, when they showed things so graphically. And, and I had this presumptuous notion, I would never do something like this, which is I had no clue. I had no clue what I would do. And it doesn't matter that I have a, meditation and mindfulness practice of over 50 years. If I was in a war and seeing people by my side being killed, I had no idea how I would react and what I would do. But I had that hatred in me, actually, back then. And then I'm marching and thinking about all the suffering that happened to Vietnam veterans when they came back, and also just how it's been one war after another. And I just thought, what is it that I actually can do? If I can't stop us from going to war, what can I do? And it became real clear to me that if it was my kids coming back from war, what I would wish for them. And what I would wish for them is that they would have a safe place to gather with other people who had similar experiences, that they would be in a place that would be held by practice and held by people who were not afraid of pain, but also who weren't going to try and push anything out of them, but just could deeply hold space to be present for what was there, and that they could have a practice that would sustain them. And then I thought, I can offer workshops in sensory awareness in case any veterans would want to participate. And I decided I was going to do that. I decided I would offer 4 one-day sensory awareness workshops and see if anybody was interested. And I had no idea if it would be useful, but I felt like I didn't need anybody's permission to do it. I didn't need training to do it. I knew I could offer that. I needed to learn about veterans, but I knew I could do that too. Because actually, a whole piece of my life that I didn't mention is that I had become an early childhood educator, and I did that for years and years, and was a college instructor, and did a lot of work on diversity and equity issues. And
what year were you doing diversity and equity?
Many years, David.
Well, it was starting when? Starting
in. I have to figure out all these things. So I got my degree in early childhood education, my master's degree in probably 1986, something like that.
Yeah, okay.
Something like that. And then always I was interested in diversity and equity issues. And so from then on, I was teaching and leading studying and then leading diversity trainings. And I helped to develop the first 3-unit early childhood education course in the country on working with LGBT families. and taught that in different places. And so I had done a lot.
You're talking about doing all that in the late 80s, say.
Well, I worked in early childhood from the late 80s all the way, and I stopped doing it just recently. I've still consulted in early childhood. This is the first year I haven't done it, actually. So even when I was doing Veterans Path, I was still doing some early childhood work. And so I led a lot of equity, diversity trainings and developed this course and gave over like 100 workshops in the Bay Area, because the Bay Area was not welcoming for LGBT families in early childhood settings. And then taught this. It wasn't?
It wasn't?
Mm-mm. Nope. Teachers, it's so interesting, and I would tend to bet it still isn't. We would give children's books that had included lesbian and gay families to teachers. I remember I did a presentation at a diversity class at a college, and we had a grant to give out books and to help teachers use books. And I was talking to them and doing, showing videos and all this stuff. And then I gave everybody a children's book. And I said, thinking of this was just kind of like a throwaway question, how many of you, when you go back to your classrooms next week, are going to, share this book with the children in your classrooms? And like 3 people raised their hand. And I was so stunned, and then I asked why. And people were afraid that parents would misinterpret it, that parents would be upset, that they wouldn't know how to explain this to children. And, and it's gotten more polarized even now than it was. But yeah, even in the Bay Area, teachers didn't know how to do this or weren't comfortable.
Mm-hmm.
But so that's been a part of my life and a part of my work. I had gotten my master's degree in early childhood education. When Mark and I left Tassajara, we both went back to New York, and I got my master's in education. He got his master's in business. So part of what I knew was how culturally incompetent I was about the military, and I understood about cultural competency. I knew that I had to learn about people's experience, but I knew that I could do that. And then I mentioned to Chris that I wanted to do this, and
Chris who
had been feeling Chris Fortin, who was a good friend of mine, and we had lived together at Zen Center. And I told Chris that I was going to do this. I had just decided I was going to do it, and he had been feeling the same way. She had been wanting to offer meditation practice to veterans, also feeling so concerned and sad for what happened to kids when they came back. So we decided we were going to do this together. And then I was actually at Tassajara for a No Race, this event that would happen regularly every year, annually at Tassajara, when people would walk or run up the mountain. And I was walking up the road with Linda Gallion, who at that time was somehow in charge of, I forgot what her role was. She was in charge of, I don't remember. She wasn't president of Zen Center at that time, but I'm not sure what her role was, but I told her what Chris and I were wanting to do, and she said, well, Zen Center should support you. We should be your fiscal sponsor. Actually, before they became our fiscal sponsor, she said, we should support you. And then, so she arranged it for Zen Center to host our 4 events. And so we did 2 at City Center and 2 at Green Gulch Farm. And Zen Center hosted them.
Huh, that's really good. And what year was that?
All right, let's see. Probably 2007.
Oh.
2007 or 2008.
Oh, the first one was 2007. Oh, yeah, sure.
2007 or either 2007 or 2008, because Chris and I left being part of the organization in a formal way in 2019.
Mm-hmm.
And 2007 was when we first started organizing this and talking to Zen Center and arranging it. And it was 2007 because it was 12 years. Yeah. And then Zen Center eventually became our fiscal sponsor and helped us raise money. And
that's amazing. That's incredible.
And then we did retreats at Tassajara for the veterans.
Yeah. Wow, that's really good.
Mm-hmm.
So, have you? I'm very impressed with that whole thing. So, have you pretty much come full circle here from when we started off? Asked you what were you doing in Missoula, and is there anything else you'd like to touch on?
Well, I think that the work with veterans to me, there's so many pieces that were so important. And, one of them was the power of community and being witnessed and the power of being present and helping people come to be trusting in this connection with breath and in the present moment and being able to face things that are so incredibly painful and horrendous and being able to find the kind of inner spaciousness and room and the way of having compassion for each other that creates safety. And I have so many stories that have touched me in these experiences with veterans and seeing how they could connect and reconnect and find their own aliveness and face into things that are so difficult. And I feel like what I learned also with the veterans, and then also, with the wildland firefighters who are also on such a cutting edge of service and suffering, and how it feels to me also just how vital it is that as a world and as a community that we show up for the kind of suffering that's happening on the earth and the harm that's being done, and that we have to wake up to it. And so I feel like that's been part of this. I mean, that's been part of the whole trajectory of my life, is learning how to wake up and learning what we can trust that helps us be present to meet whatever's here.
Mm-hmm.
And so I felt like I didn't want to be running an organization, and that's why I left in 2019. But also because I feel like I want to find some way to work directly around the climate crisis and how can we respond. And I have these two beautiful grandchildren, and my heart breaks a lot. My heart breaks with love. One of the things I said to the veterans, we made dog tags actually on the Veterans Path, and a colleague did this, and she took a quote that I said at the end of a retreat after I had heard one traumatic story after another, so much pain. And I think one of the things I learned working at Veterans Path, but it's also what I learned at Tassajara as a Zen student, was that there's nothing my heart can't hold when open. And I feel like that's really so important. And I remember holding my grandson when he was a baby and sitting in the rocking chair and feeling him fall asleep in my arms. And there we were, kind of breath to breath, belly to belly. And it was so beautiful. And then I started weeping. And, I could weep right now, just feeling like these innocent kids and what they're going to face because of the choices we're making or not making. And I just feel like we have a responsibility to protect life. So that kind of brings me full circle, David.
Yeah. Well, very impressive. Well, you've you know, looking back, it's interesting, talking about, you came from a family where, a Jewish family in a Jewish neighborhood. Nobody mentioned the Holocaust. I'm sure you heard about it elsewhere.
I did elsewhere.
Yeah, I heard about it. My father took me to a Holocaust, like, it was like walking down halls with giant, horrible pictures when I was like 6 years old.
Wow.
It was a whole demonstration of, it was just pictures. And he didn't say anything. He just let me see it and know what it was.
Wow.
Yeah. That was, but you found out. But then being in college and not knowing really why you're there or what you're doing, but you figured it all out. You had a great trajectory, but you had help too. Like, I love this thing about your mother giving you, now your mother got it from a friend, right? The thing on Charlotte.
No, my mother took a weekend workshop with Charlotte.
Oh.
And after she took that weekend workshop, she just knew that Charlotte could change my life.
Oh, I missed that. Oh, wow. That is so far out. And, that is great.
And, I ended up, my mother died when she was 59 years old. I had more time with Charlotte in my life than I did with my mother.
Well, and what did your father do?
What did he do?
Yeah.
He was a lawyer, but he worked as a negotiator and administrator at CBS News.
Oh, goodness.
And so he did contracts and negotiations for people's contracts, and he also defended CBS against Nixon and Spiro Agnew when they sued CBS, and both my parents, supported me to study with Charlotte, and although my dad couldn't understand it, he had no idea what it was, and also, but they both supported me.
Oh, that's good.
And my mom was the one who opened that door for me.
Wow. Well, and I think we'll be. I look forward to seeing what other, how your path evolves from now, because you and Mark are both really active people, and you're in Missoula, and you're in Marin still too, right?
Yeah, I mean, Mark's there right now. And,
yeah.
We'll see. It's going to take a lot to get me away from my grandkids.
Yeah, good.
I don't know. We'll see. I think if it were up to me, I'd probably just move here and stay. Mark's not ready to do that.
Yeah.
So we'll see what happens.
Yeah. Katrinka and I have a similar situation. She just really loves to be with her son's kids, and very close, and they talk so much. And she's seen my granddaughters too. I don't go back to America, but they come here, so that's enough. So, well, thanks a lot, Lee. That's really wonderful. I appreciate it.
I appreciate you calling, David. And I have a question for you. How did you take in at 6 years old seeing the pictures of the Holocaust?
I just took it in. I just saw that that it was just like, it wasn't, and it was a memory that was a very significant, prominent memory, but I don't associate it with any trauma or anything like that. It was just, I just took it in, and this is one of the things that can happen here on Earth. This is one of the things that people have done to each other. I don't really think I thought a lot. Basically, I just took it in. I certainly didn't forget it. Yeah.
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 And David, thank you for all the ways that you hold the Zen Center history together and all you do for Crooked Cuke. And it's pretty wonderful how much you've collected for all of us.
My pleasure. I want to talk to Mark too. I'll get him. He's got a new book out. Why don't you? I'll send him a message saying maybe you should. I should get you on to talk about your book.
Yeah, he'd love to.
And a lot more. He's got his own very different, very interesting path.
That's true.
Yeah. All right. Very good.
Well, thanks a lot, David. Take good care.
Yeah, you too. All right.
All righty.
So thanks a lot, Lee Klinger Lesser. That was great. Really appreciate it. Really appreciate what you've done and what you're doing. This has been a Cuke Audio podcast. I'm DC Poobah of Cuke Audio and Cuke Archives, coming to you from sleepy Sanur with Doggett Bandita, guest Doggett Boombo, visiting Sun Clay, lovely April, delightful 1.5-year-old Isla, dear lovely Katrinka. And we're wishing you and yours and all of us a grand awakening.